assuming the history isn't over and that the labor movement revives, how can we make sure that it's an actual labor movement as opposed to just more business unionism?
Well, I guess my first reaction is revival is unlikely with the business union model that is premised really on the employer's desire to engage in collective bargaining, to respect that process. I mean, business unionism is built on a model of collaboration with the employer and the employer's willingness to kind of recognize labor as a collective entity. And it seems to me that since sometime in the late 70s, the gloves, I'm not sure when, you know, maybe it was the Taft-Hartley Act which was in the 50s, was passed in the 50s, a very anti-labor law, or maybe it was the beginning of the energy crisis in the 70s, or perhaps the busting of the bankruptcy of Chrysler when the automakers came after the collective bargaining agreements of auto workers, or the Patco strike. You can find your flashpoint, whatever you want to say it is. The gloves came off, and employers are all done with labor, right? There's no.
Patco, I think, was
fine. Use that as your benchmark, but I might pick Taft-Hartley. But at some point, employers are like, we're done with labor unions, and we're not going to play ball at any level with labor organizations. So I think that our prospects of building a labor movement on the foundation of business unionism are very, very bleak. And much more likely in the near future is the continued trend that Steve talked about, which is the free fall of formal union membership is going to continue. I don't see that changing. And it's much more likely that our labor movement will be a much more informal in the sense of, you know, there'll be worker centers, there'll be coalitions, there'll be the vestiges of collective bargaining that still exist, there'll be organizations in the workplace that we support and sustain through committed activists and, you know, class warriors that are there, and it'll be a network of those that will define a labor movement that's a much more of you know, you'd have to define it as much more of a guerrilla-like army. And that can be effective. It has been proven effective in other generations and other entities. So it's going to take different forms. And I think our obligation is to be preparing and organizing and readying ourselves for that time of revival. And you can't predict history. You can't know when that might occur. All you can do is to try to do your one part. I was reading the editorial about the incredible struggle with this guy here who protested the illegal land sale, and he, you know, essentially committed an act of civil disobedience. And, you know, you don't know whether that's going to, and it compared his act to Rosa Parks, sitting in the front seat of the bus and getting arrested for violating the color laws. So you don't know if that's going to be the beginning of something incredible or just another blip in history, but and with the labor movement, we don't know whether the TSA screeners campaign for dignity and justice on the job could be the beginning of a revitalized labor movement. Or it could be the Rio Tinto miners in California. We don't know. All we can do is throw ourselves into the fight and hope that that's going to be another brick in the wall, and that at some point those bricks begin to really add up to something. Yes.
So how do we're all struggling, all of our different groups and movements, peace and justice, labor, environmental, climate, LGBT, immigration. We're all struggling to get people involved and get people together How do we make this happen for all of our groups? How do we get people engaged? How do we bridge the gap between and among all those issues? I mean, I think that's what our conference is about, and I'd like to hear ideas from you from the labor movement perspective of how to connect with the climate movement, the environmental movement. You've mentioned a number in terms of peace and war, and those are extremely important. What about some of these other examples?
Well, I just talked before. Why don't you talk?
Well, I mean, the one group in the labor movement that I think has done the most to try to do education among union members about the impact of foreign and military policy on the public sector, on union jobs, and on the society is U.S. Labor Against the War. And when that was launched in response to the invasion and occupation of Iraq, there wasn't a lot of labor-based anti-war sentiment. And it was hard to get local unions to discuss, taking a stand on the war. A lot of people felt an obligation to kind of rally around the president, to rally around this national objective. But over time, that particular network has succeeded, certainly in my own old union, the Communication Workers of America, really having an impact on kind of rank and file opinion. Also the course of events, the number of people killed, and the thing turning out to be what it's turned out to be. So you began to see national, local, regional bodies adopting anti-war resolutions after very spirited debate. More activists from more sectors of the labor movement coming to meetings and conferences and making this an issue that initially many people would have said, this is too controversial, we can't touch it with a 10-foot pole, we have too many kind of day-to-day problems, we don't need a controversy like this that doesn't affect our membership, when in fact, many unions have many members who are serving in, Afghanistan and Iraq, and whose families are affected by it, and communities and so forth. So I think that's one model. On the environmental front, the steelworkers really deserves nationally, I think, the lion's share of the credit for pioneering and spearheading this Blue-Green Alliance with the Sierra Club and other environmental groups. There's another group called the Apollo Alliance. Alumni of the oil, chemical, and atomic workers within the steel workers are still, in the spirit of the late Tony Mazzocchi, trying to build bridges between workers' organizations and environmental organizations, and certainly compared to where we were 35 or 40 years ago, when those two groups were almost always at loggerheads. Today there's much greater understanding, certainly on the labor side, that global warming is a threat to everybody, that the jobs of the future for many building tradesmen and women may lie in solar energy and other forms of construction and energy production that's more environmentally friendly. And I think you see the sheet metal workers, the carpenters in some places, certainly among the industrial unions, the steel workers, having conferences, supporting joint legislative initiatives, doing membership education. For a union like the steelworkers, it's still, I'm sure, controversial internally. I get steel labor. I mean, these are tens of thousands of manufacturing union members still working in paper mills and smelters and mines and chemical plants and nuclear power plants. So it's not like everybody is, knee-jerk green in that union's membership. But the president, Leo Gerard, was originally